So, this is the time. How many people in here have been to ComNet before? Quite a lot of you. So you know what we do right now. So we're about to have what I think we call, I believe the technical term is a teachable moment. If you happen to have, and I know what you guys do for a living, you're communicators, like Chris, right now you're in your phone. If you have looked in your phone, we've scooped ourselves. Right now is the time where I typically tell you where we're going for the conference next year. But, because technology is cool, we had auto-scheduled it. Because we're like, well, I'll be up here at 11:15 and I'll tell you, and then we'll send it at 11:20 and it'll be seamless and beautiful. So if you look in your phone, you know what I'm about to say. Next year, the Communications Network will gather all of you beautiful people. I hope every one of you will be with us. Does everybody want to come join us? We're going to, this is where I usually do this fun song and dance where I say, I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to show you, but apparently I've already shown you. So gentlemen, if you would, let's show them where we're headed. So the really cool thing is that you can go to the comnet18.org website right now and sign up for next year. And if you're among the first 200 people to do so, you get a pretty fancy price. We are headed to the Westin St. Francis right on Union Square. So the reason we picked that really cool cable car, you're going to get a poster so you can bring it back and hang it up on your office so you have something to look forward to. But doesn't that look nice? Wow. Anyway, if you go there right now, first 200 of you are going to get a nice discount. What is that? All right, well anyway, if you go there for a little while, you'll see a nice overhead drone shot of beautiful San Francisco. We will be there October 10th through the 12th. One thing I can note about those dates is that for our friends who celebrate Yom Kippur, I am sorry that we have scheduled on a very, very special and holy day. It's certainly special my family celebrates. So easy fast for all of you. Grateful you all are here. We have a wonderful closing to the conference. Sandy's going to come up here and introduce these folks, but I can just tell you, just to warm them up, I was on the phone with Franklin and Daphne the other day, and in the span of about 40 seconds, Franklin took us from Leonardo da Vinci and Jean-Michel Basquiat to Kendrick Lamar. So I'm down. This is going to be pretty damn cool. Enjoy. Sandy, if you don't mind too terribly, come on up and introduce these beautiful people. Oh, sorry. Amy Witter. Amy Witter. I'm hoping you're in this room. She came all the way from London. We have your phone. And we've been emailing you, but frankly, I don't think that's going to work because we have your phone. So if you know Amy or you are Amy, your phone is right out there. All right, Sandy, all you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to see you here. I'm Sandy Smith, Director of Communications with the California Wellness Foundation. Yay! I just want to say that one of the things that I want you all to know is that we have two offices. One is in San Francisco, that's where I'm based, and we have an office that was in Woodland Hills until Monday. And as of Monday, it is in downtown Los Angeles, across from the public library, and just 6 miles from LACMA, where our guest speaker used to work. We've been talking a lot about meaning and words and what do words mean, and I just want to point out that I've been reflecting on the fact that even though words may have a meaning, that when you look it up in the dictionary, they don't really mean as much until we talk about what those words mean. Meaning is made as we work together to make the meaning. And we have today a speaker who is redefining what a museum means. I had a chance to go last night to see this incredible space, the Pérez Art Museum, and it truly, it is a huge building, beautiful building that can survive a Hurricane 5 winds. And when people's electricity went out here in Miami, Franklin opened the doors of the museum so that people who didn't have electricity could come in. And it was almost like a museum arc, right? It is a space where the community is welcome. The museum is a town square, a space for interactions, a bridge between young people and police. They've invited in young people to talk to police, to deal with trauma, to have art be a space for creation and bridge building. Frank is considered, I learned, a rock star in the art world, yet he's down to earth. He's making a place where contemporary art is relevant and creating a space for contemporary issues. Without further ado, I want to bring Daphne Muse, who is Communication Director with the Walton Family Foundation, and Franklin Sirmans to the stage.
Franklin,
Hey,
thank you for
Daphne.
being here with us tonight, this afternoon. Sorry.
These rooms make us feel like we're at night.
It does feel like
It's like a
nighttime.
casino.
Yeah. So just, first to Sean and the ComNet team and the board, this conference seems to get better, I think, every single year, and I'm not sure how you are going to top this year, but San Francisco, I think, is an excellent start, so great. So a bit more about you. Born in Queens, raised kind of upstate. Your undergraduate degree is in art history and English, and you've been at the Pérez for
Almost 2 years.
almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Came from LACMA, Stinson, Houston, and New Orleans. Also known as a rock star, and and someone who is really taking the pretense out of art and accessing art. So I have to say, when I first discussed this opportunity with Sean, I was thrilled because, one, you are another example of someone with an English degree who has managed to have a productive career. So,
It
way
took
to
a
go.
moment.
Way to go. It's inspiring. I too have an English degree. But second, the foundation that I work for, the Walton Family Foundation, in addition to investments in K-12 education and conservation, we've really seen just the transformative power of art on a community and with individuals. And so we've had the incredible fortune to work with Alice Walton, who is just a pioneering philanthropist. And it's her vision that's really guided our efforts to expand access to art. And it's not just the physical access, it's the education, and it's the interpretation. And so the anchor for this, and you have experienced this place
Yeah.
as well, is Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And when you and I first talked, I shared this experience that I had had with both our leadership team and my comms team. And I want to just recap that a little bit. But we spent about 90 minutes as a team with 3 works of art. And that was the lead-in to a strategy session with flip charts and Post-it notes. And what we found as we went through this experience, one piece we sat and we kept moving our position. We were sitting on little stools and we kept moving around. And it showed us how when we look at things from a different point of view, it changes our perspective. We spent some more time trying to figure out what this little man holding a bag was thinking about. And we came up with all sorts of things. We said, he's an alcoholic, he's just got a bad medical diagnosis. And the answer was that we didn't know. And we were projecting our own experiences and fears on this piece of art. But the last piece, and we have a slide here, and I love this. This is about 50 pounds of green cellophane wrapped candy. It is Felix Gonzalez Torres. It's an untitled work. And so as you can see, we literally dug in to this piece. And we felt it, we dug, we tasted, and then we sat and we wrote what we were thinking, and we wrote a poem as well. And this is some of our communications team involved here. And then we moved to a planning meeting, and I think everyone, our minds were just opened. It was such an amazing feeling, and really had a productive strategy session. But when I did this with our leadership team, the person who took the most away from it was our head accountant, our finance guy. And he's probably the one that was scratching his head the most at the beginning of this experience. And so it really speaks to me as to how we all have the capacity to appreciate and be inspired by art. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today, and just some of the conversations that art drives. You started your career also in finance.
Yeah.
Tell us about that transition.
Okay. There's so many good strands to pick up on. I just first can't get the image out of my head, so shout out to Felix Gonzalez-Torres, who's no longer with us, but of course lived here in Miami. A big part of our art history is in his work. I also just want to say thank you to Sean and to the Communications Network and Sande, and a big thank you to my colleague, Christina Boomer-Vasquez, who's on the host committee and is our Director of Marketing and Public Engagement, and also Andrew Sherry, who's representing the Knight Foundation and who's also a great partner of ours. So it's awesome to be here and good to be with you, Daphne, and in this conversation. So many different points of departure that you mentioned. Where should we begin? On the last part?
So tell us about, and you shared this with Sean and I, kind of how you made the decision to move into a career in the arts.
Well, a career, right? My father laughed when I said there was a career.
Mine did too when I majored in English. Yeah.
I mean, I worked in finance because I came home from college in 1991 from Wesleyan University, and I had a little brother, right? And I had a stepmother. And the little brother was about 9 months old, so it wasn't going to work to stay at home. So I got a job at Shearson Lehman American Express and got an apartment relatively fast. The idea of working in the space of museums for me came later, and I think in many ways, I was probably thinking about our English degree, and I was thinking about the art history aspect of what I also studied as being, this template for writing, and communications would be an easy way or a relatively available avenue to write and to have a gig or something that would allow you to continue to do that. And so I guess it was really about recognizing the fact that in the early 1990s, to be a writer in New York City and to pay rent in New York City was relatively tough. And so the idea of having a day job, if you will, was something that had to be considered. And the museum was really that kind of backdrop. I was writing reviews for Publishers Weekly. I was writing reviews for every single Brooklyn rag you could possibly think of that was kind of considered new or somehow related to hip hop. These things, in a way, consolidated around a magazine-like vibe, but there were many things that led to that. So for me, it was a necessity, and the museum provided a way to keep thinking about writing and to even do writing while having the kind of backdrop that also took into consideration images. And to me, it's just always been about how do we put images together with text, which is something that we all do in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all, in communications, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and fortunately, you can't always get 1,000 words in a tweet or a blog post or something like that. So, but certainly this mashup that you described.
Yeah, but writing in that time period was I was writing reviews for Time Out in New York, and I remember when it went from 500 to 350 to 250. And all of this coincided with new technology, and obviously we had to figure out a way to morph along with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this morning, Sean interviewed Michelle Norris, and they talked about the race card project that she has launched, and really talked about a lot of the tough conversations that are going on in our country right now. And I mean, the museum, it's actually in your mission to facilitate, I have to read this, facilitate catalytic engagement with the most progressive visual arts of our time. But you are facilitating these tough conversations. Can you tell us how you're doing that and how art serves as a launch pad?
Well, I think one of the reasons why I was attracted to art history in the first place was the fact that there's a space to make considerations of time, of place, of our world that can be on the probing side, that can be on the uncomfortable side, that can be on the tough side, that it's a space for us to talk about things that we might not be comfortable with and that artists are the ones that first and foremost are taking us to that place. And so, you know, in a way, it was like, I guess a lot of the curatorial aspect in particular was about wanting to be around artists and wanting to be around people who thought that they could change the world. And change the world with simply their hands, you know, what they're doing in the studio. You made a reference to, in one of the pieces, to this idea of basically take something, do something to it, do something else to it, which is Jasper Johns' famous sort of refrain. And I think that idea, if we take it and we apply it to many different arenas of life, that it allows us to see things differently. It allows us to see the other side. It allows us to have perhaps a degree of empathy that we might not be able to have without the art object in front of us or without the image in front of us. Obviously, right now, words don't always do what we want them to do.
Right. And there's a current exhibit of Cuban artwork, and talk to us about the lead-in to that exhibit and some of the tensions that you dealt with and how that has provoked conversation.
Well, things have changed since we spoke. I will say that what we try to do is, you know, you mentioned some of it, is that to be a museum in the 21st century, it seems to me that the idea of just going to the museum to look at something on the wall and having this sort of rarefied conversation around connoisseurship is only but one very small aspect of what I find to be interesting in the museum space. So what we've tried to do and what we discuss, and I think I say we because it's not just us, we have a movement of people, not just in this country, but around the world, that see visual art and see museums as arenas for discussion and arenas for things to happen and places for people to be in dialogue and to be inspired in ways that they're not able to do in other spaces, right? Here in Miami, I think you guys probably experience it somewhat during this week, right? It's not the kind of place where you end up on a subway or a bus, for that matter, sitting across from a bunch of people that don't look like you and just being in that environment together. We need our civic commons, and I think this is a perfect place for us to have a real 21st century museum that thinks in a way that is more progressive than the past. So what we've tried to do, and you can see it in our beautiful building, is that we've tried to create spaces where people feel comfortable to come regardless of what's on the walls. We sit right on Biscayne Bay, on the other side of the water from here. We have an environment that I think is very much conducive to people sitting down and being together. And we've tried to make that the forefront of what we do. And we do that with exhibitions, and we do that with programs, and that is always the starting point. The art is the starting point, but it's about getting somewhere else. So you mentioned the Cuban art exhibition.
And I think we have a photo of that. You guys can, there we go.
Okay, so this is a part of an exhibition that's on view right now. And it's a group exhibition. It's the kind of show that obviously has to happen here. I should say that, you know, you showed a piece by Felix Gonzalez-Torres. I mean, this is a guy who came from Cuba and was in Miami. This is a story. This is the story of this place. And we've been a part of it for a long time. When the museum opened in the new building, 2013, we opened with an exhibition of the artist Ai Weiwei, Chinese. We opened with an artist, a British artist named Hugh Locke, and we opened with an artist named Amelia Pelaez, a Cuban artist, whose work is really couched in modernism. But it's about that sort of contextualization is what we're always trying to do. So this exhibition is on view now. It comes from the collection of George Perez, a local collector and someone with an appetite for collecting that is just infectious and nonstop, and with a passion for art and ideas that goes beyond most of what we can imagine. And so we have this ability to show hundreds of works over the course of the next year in 3 different iterations. It's an incredible show. I highly recommend people to come and see it. But there's one little caveat that I have to mention within the context of Miami. We have artists in the exhibition who have lived on the island of Cuba. And that does not, you cannot do that here as easily as you would like. So it's a little bit controversial. We show artists from the Cuban diaspora at all times. But that aspect is something that is challenging in today's environment. And it goes everywhere. We can talk about, you allude to other things that are happening now. Minneapolis. Sam Durant, a wonderful artist who lives in Los Angeles, makes work that comes from guillotines, that comes from a history of architecture around hangings, right? And one of these happens to pertain to a massacre that happened in Minneapolis. So when Sam showed this piece in Germany 10 years ago, nobody said a word. The piece goes on view in Minneapolis, it's a different context. And that's what we have. And it makes it really exciting and really invigorating, and sometimes it makes it tough. But we want to have these kind of hard conversations. And I really believe that, that's what our artists are for. And that's what we would like to be a bridge to get behind.
Absolutely. Well, you talked about, being the museum of the 21st century. And I think you told the New York Times that the Pérez is going to be a focal point for that conversation. Obviously, you are. But tell us, what are the works of art, the contemporary art of today, that will inform future generations about this moment in time in our country, in our world?
Yeah, I think in part thinking about, thinking back and how we relate to that idea of being a progressive institution in the 21st century is that we're here in Miami and we have the opportunity to think about how we might look different than other museums across our country. We live in a city where, more than half the population speaks Spanish, at least. We're in a place where something like 70% of the people actually were born somewhere else. So in many ways, we have the perfect ingredients to look like a museum or look like a place that is different from other places in this country, and I think indicative of where we are going. One way that we've been, I think, effective and played a role in that change is that we're a museum of international contemporary art. There are many others like us around the world. But what we choose to do and what we want to do is we want to be the best at presenting the work of Latin America and the Caribbean. And that's where we are, and that's the trajectory that we're working with. And we happen to have a lot of great artists that come out of that tradition. So you say, what is the great art that we might think about hundreds of years later? I like to believe, and I do believe, that Felix Gonzalez Torres's imprint is going to be felt for a very, very long time. That piece you referred to, a highly conceptual piece, right? You pack it up, you put it away, pieces of candy. It comes with instructions about how you are actually supposed to put it down as a form or as a composition, right? But we get to do that, and we get to do that in different times and in different places. Recently, we had up a small pile of Felix's, and it was actually on view another place in the country. So there's this idea that a work of art, unlike the masterpiece of the late, even 20th century at this point, does not necessarily have to be this idea of a unique piece that only exists for one person to have for $200 million, right? It can be something that has a multivalent structure that allows for different people to experience it in different places at a single given time. And it can be about, I think with Felix, it's about a level of generosity that is just, if we need it, like we need it now and we need it in the future. And that's what that piece sums up for me in many ways, because you're allowed to actually take it away. Yeah. How many pieces of great masterpieces of art are you allowed to actually take with you?
Yeah, and dig. In fact, we were talking with the museum staff afterward, and we said, because they have to replenish the candy. If people are eating it, you have to refill it. I said, so what did you actually buy here? And it's largely the idea. Yeah. So the idea is the art, which is pretty spectacular. Yeah. When we talked earlier, kind of go back to what art of today is going to tell future generations, you brought up Beyonce and a number of musicians. Just talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in music and how that is perhaps even more on the forefront than visual arts.
I think that one of the reasons why we actually talk about wanting to have a conversation around the museum that is perhaps a little bit more future-oriented is because we recognize the fact of our past and our history. And so music, to segue, has been more of a lingua franca, right? It's been more of a vehicle for discussion or a vehicle for talking about issues that has been for more people in the past. And I think that's something that we're hooking into. And in the museum space, we do that with a interesting concentration, if you will, on film and video art, and seeing that as a space in which we can be a lot more effective than, say, a painting. I think that Beyonce, I mean, we mentioned that, but I mean, the images from that video, which was created by an artist, is something that is indelible, is something that should have a life that continues on. So I think I was saying it in that context. I also feel like there is a discussion that has happened in music over the course of the last year that presages much of the things that we're talking about on a daily basis politically. If I think about Solange's album, if I think about Kendrick Lamar's album, if you think about Jay-Z's album, there are a lot of people that are addressing issues that are at the forefront of our daily lives. And that's what our best artists do.
And that was kind of one of your earliest entries with, with your thesis and
so part of wanting to move the conversation somewhat forward, while loving 20th century art, while loving 19th century art, but part of the conversation and the desire to move it forward and to have a discussion that could be a little bit more relevant in our time and place has been to pick up on ideas that come from a more mass or more popular culture. So yes, the first real exhibition I did in institutional space was called One Planet Under a Groove, Contemporary Art and Hip Hop. And it was an exhibition that sought to look at how this phenomenon played out in the hands of artists. And hundreds of artists around the world were working with it as material and as ideas for their artwork. Another exhibition has concentrated on the relationship to sport in contemporary art. And then, plug, in April of this year, we'll have an exhibition up called The World's Game, Contemporary Art and Football. Like, how do we talk about, well, obviously sport has become more of a metaphor recently, but how do we talk about these things in a broader sense? And I think that's one way that we bring in a lot more people to the museum. We've also done it with ideas around spirituality, an exhibition called Neo Hoodoo, Art for a Forgotten Faith, which sought to look at spirituality as material or as subject for contemporary visual artists. And obviously dealing with a lot of issues that could be part of our present conversation. So that's been one way to try and move that conversation forward.
That's fantastic. Checking the time. Okay, we're good. Tell us a little bit about, just as as a nation, as we become so much more diverse, how are you seeing that in the artist of today, and what story?
Well, I think also we talked a little bit about institutional context, and so with both of us being involved to some degree with that, there has been a changing, there has been a diversifying, at least in some ways, of what has been the traditional makeup of our nation's museums. And that's being propelled by the Mellon Foundation, it's being propelled by the Ford Foundation, the Knight Foundation, being propelled by the Walton Family Foundation. There's a conversation that sees the value, the obvious value, and corporations talk about this all the time, the obvious value in diversity and what it means to be a organization that has a level of diversity in terms of every aspect, not just race, but gender, sexuality. These things are part and parcel of what I believe helps make us a more whole experience as far as it goes in terms of representing our country or even representing international ideas.
And I know most of us in this room work for a nonprofit of some sort, and there's We certainly have plenty of space to grow in diversifying our leadership, but what have been some of the barriers in the museum world and in diversifying leadership in museums?
I mean, you know, we refer to a past, right? If we only think about the fact that if you go to any one of our great cities' museums and you look at the work of, say, the beginning of the 20th century, the people who produce that work tend to look the same, and they tend to be of the same gender. So maybe it's only a natural progression from there that most of the people that brought that work into the museum might look a little bit like that. But that's the kind of thing that's changing. And you know, I think it goes hand in hand together. If you have artists who are speaking to the here and now of this moment, I think you need people who also can see that moment along with them. And I think that's beginning to sync up a little bit. It's certainly happening. I mean, for us, it's happening in a big way simply because of where we are. And so it's been something that we've been recognized for in that conversation. Just this week, we brought in our first Ford Fellow, and it's a position that the Ford Foundation got behind with us because they want to do exactly what you're talking about. They're looking to diversify the field because they believe that there's value in having other voices. And while I make that equation to the art, it really doesn't have anything to do with who relates to what in the present. You know, you can be talking about European art of the 16th century. I think that there's value in diversifying the curatorial or the directors who are looking at that work in the present. And that's what they're getting behind, and that's what we're doing. So we just brought in our first Ford Fellow. Happy to do that. It's a 2-year term and allows for us to have, it's more or less defined around a person of color. And to bring in somebody who's going to look at our collection and talk about some of the ideas that go into our art collection and how we might talk about that in the future.
That's great. So shifting to, you know, hyper-local now in recent events, and it was mentioned in the introduction, you were able to open your doors quickly after the storm and provide electricity and much needed air conditioning. And we have a picture of families enjoying the museum as well as the amenities that you were able to offer. Tell us about that process and the decision making.
Well, it goes back to, like, what are you, you know, as a museum? Who are you there for? And we're there for our community. And I think that means, you know, not just putting together exhibitions, but doing what we can to be a part of a civic conversation. We feel that we have a stance that is valuable in our conversation, you know, just like other arenas of thought, corporations, other nonprofits, schools, sports teams, have different ideas that all can contribute to the conversation. And one way that we can contribute is we have this incredible building. We're inviting people into that building. Also, we have an incredible team. I mean, Christina was, you know, that probably happened before I even thought about it, to be perfectly honest. And it's kind of an ethos for our entire organization. If we can help within our community, then we want to. So last night, people could come in free if you brought supplies to send to people who have been affected by the hurricanes, particularly in the Caribbean. And that's the kind of thing that is at the core of our mission. As much as we want to reflect, you know, the world around us through the exhibitions and programs, we also have an absolute duty to Miami and to our local community. We were, you know, as an organization, we go back to 1984. And when the organization started, we started in a small space in Government Center, right? We were considered to be part of a group of buildings that provided a civic structure, right? So you had lawmakers next door, that kind of thing. And we take that strongly when we believe that we're part of a much bigger conversation than the international art conversation, especially here. So that it's a natural thing. If we can open up a few days after that when people are dealing with a lot of really tough things and provide a space to to think differently maybe for a moment, or to get out of that space, to provide a space that will allow for some other kind of thought, then that's what we're there for. So it happened relatively easy.
Yeah. Well, congratulations to your team, and great team with a great leader.
So. Oh, thank you.
So going back, just talking about, we're largely communicators in this room, and so you can certainly make the connection with creativity and communications. But something that really stands out to me, and it again goes back to your earliest experiences in a different discipline. I was struck by a quote that Alice had shared with us.
Oh, yeah.
From a book, The Art Spirit, written in 1923. Robert, I'm told it's Henry. I am pronouncing it right, aren't I? Okay. And he just described, people with the art spirit. They're inventive, searching, daring. They disturb, upset, enlighten, and open better ways for understanding. So, again, going back to how we can all access art in all fields, obviously communications, but what about business, engineering, medicine?
Yeah, I think another core aspect of being that kind of forward-thinking institution is that education in a broad sense. Is that our core value? We are there to provide arts-based learning, and we do that in a place like most where public school system doesn't do that as much as they once might have. So we are there to do that. We've had almost 200,000 students come in from the Miami-Dade public school system since we opened in December of 2013. So it's a core part of what we do, and we do that with art educators, we do that with bringing in students, and we also do that by bringing art to different communities throughout our county. So it's a completely integral way of thinking, and of thinking about what the museum can be.
When we had talked, you mentioned problem solving.
Yes, yes. I think that we're not trying to necessarily create artists. We're just trying to provide another sort of system for education, another way for people to think. And I think that's the best part, is that if you just take those core kind of things that we were talking about looking at something from different sides, it helps you build a better product. It helps you think about other people and how they might receive your product. That idea of empathy, or that idea of putting yourself in another person's shoes. It just makes for better, I think, better thinking. I mean, it's an opinion, but I believe that if people are exposed to art and to the idea of being able to see things from different angles, from different sides, that it can be applied in many different ways, no matter what vocation one goes on to take. That engagement with art as a part of the education process allows for us to create something better.
Yeah. Well, I want to be sure we save time for questions, and I believe there are some folks with handheld mics out there somewhere. Can't see. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll try to get the folks with the mics over to you. And if you would say your name, your organization, and speak very directly into the microphone. And I see we've got one question right up here. He's on his way.
Thank you. My name is Edith, and I work for UNICEF. And you are in a city and in a museum that receives people from all over the world. From all over the world, right? And many from Latin America, but from everywhere. And I want to take you a little bit in a different angle and ask you about leadership, and your leadership in particular. In that, you talked a lot about artists and featuring them and diversity and the meaningful, but I want to ask you about diversity in leadership. And I want to ask you, how do you see your role as a leader in this field and as a person of color, and how can you help, provide I guess by example, open the doors for this idea that this is possible and that there can be more people in leadership roles in the arts world who are people of color.
Yeah. I think, so I thank you for the question. I have thought about how we can be effective and partners in terms of exactly what you're saying. And so one way has been, this idea of, since we are a place for education, we are a place for scholarship, and traditionally curatorial ranks within the museum, the curators have been a sort of pipeline, if you will, to directors. And that's my experience. So what I've tried to do is be a integral and vocal part of a growing community of people around the world who are in discussion with each other and supporting each other. And so, it's not just the Ford Fellow that we have. We also have intern program for high school students right here in Miami. And so we're trying to be effective partners in thinking in a forward way about our partnership and what we can do as far as that increasing diversity within the field and within the sphere. And so that's been the most direct way. To me, that is the most direct way, to be able to bring in people, not just as free interns, but from even the high school level, to be able to give them something that's so that they can afford to come and work with us, because I think that can be a detriment. To not only to then take it from the high school level to take it to the post-undergraduate level. So we have a place there where somebody can come now. And then we're thinking beyond that. And we want to be able to keep doing that on a very formal level. And at the same time, like if you were to think of our institution as a place for that dialogue, then we're doing our role in that space. About a year and a half ago, we hosted one of the very first sort of discussions about this idea of Latinx, about the idea of getting away from the gender-based Latino or Latina, but to embrace this idea of Latinx. And that happened because of another great artist, Teresita Fernandez, who was born here to Cuban parents, but lives in New York, has an international following, wonderful artist, and she's part of this conversation. And we want to be a part of that conversation with her. And so we hosted a sort of roundtable discussion a year and a half ago, which then led to a major convening at the Ford Foundation in New York, maybe 6 months later. We want to be a part of that conversation, always. And we have a curatorial team. It's not just from my position, but we have a curatorial team that includes 4 people that represent a lot of those ideals.
Other questions? Oh, right here.
Hi, my name is Kareem, and I'm from the New York Foundation. And one thing that's been happening recently, we're a small foundation, and we do mostly community organizing and advocacy, grant making. And it seems that art and art makers and art organizations are becoming more and more important to advocacy and community organizing. So my question is, how do we tap into communities of artists and try to use those tools and those people who have that skill to help the organizations we fund do organizing and integrate that into other foundations?
Tell me the name of the foundation again.
The New York Foundation.
I think partnership, this idea of collaboration is something that across our nonprofit organizations is something that we at least have tried to be progressive partners and tried to seek out those sort of partnerships and rely on the expertise of others. We know what we have, right? We have a great space. We have links to artists, both who work for the museum, and then also artists who are out there in the community and around the world who have their works in our collection. And we can be a conduit for whenever that idea of images comes in to play, or the idea of art, any space for visuality that you have, that you're looking for in your conversation, at least we're looking for that. We know we can't do what you do, but we want to do what we can to help you do what you do better, and it goes both ways. You make us better, we hopefully make you better.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Is there anyone out there? All right. Well, this was a great way to close out a great week. So thank you, Franklin.
Thank you.
It was lovely to be with you today.
Thank you.
Did you hear that? Did you hear what he said? Yes. All I heard was, and maybe I'm a bit biased, but network, network, network. There's what we do, there's what you do. I'm part of a community, I'm part of a conversation. We want to be part of the discussion. That is what we do. That is what we are. So I am so grateful. This is where I get to thank you for being here, for being part of Miami. I hope you will be with us. You can take this home with you, your own little piece of art. And I guess I want to thank the guys in the back of the room who've done a brilliant job of making this all move seamlessly. Thank you very, very much. If you didn't know this, Shooty and the gang are with us every year, and every year, if this gets better, it's because of them. Tristan and Emma, our board, there are any number of folks that I could thank. They all have, I hope they know, all of our gratitude. You've been so good and kind to one another. I'm incredibly grateful. The conversation will not end. Our time together in close proximity, the way Dan talked about, this is about to end. But we have the members community, and we gather throughout the year through webinars and through Change Age. And I believe soon, if not now, you'll have gotten your next newsletter where we try to bring us together virtually and talk about what we're seeing and what's going on. So, thank you. Adios.
I've always said, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to stand up, speak up, say something, do something, get in the way, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.